On a clear day in a spacious, expensive office, the kind that only belonged to the upper class, the young Duke Peter Levry looked inquisitively at Marie, obediently standing near his luxurious table. Marie lowered her blue eyes. The Duke would not hear an intelligible answer. Marie lowered her blue eyes. The Duke would not hear an intelligible answer. Magnificent, sparkling, seductive, the main character of the novel Mask, the handsome Arthur, made Dora cry more than once. Magnificent, sparkling, seductive, the main character of the novel Mask, the handsome Arthur, made Dora cry more than once. Being a devoted fan, Dora was haunted by one important question. With a lot of effort, she found the mysterious author of the novel online and made an appointment with him. More precisely, the first life was cut short. Fate gave the girl another chance in another time and in another universe. Fate gave the girl another chance in another time and in another universe. And just at the same time, when main character, her idol Arthur, was still a 7-year-old boy perhaps, could she dream of something more? And now, after 3 years of a new life, she stood at the table of Duke Levry, Arthur's father, trying to collect her thoughts and answer why he called her. Without allowing this silence to continue, the Duke looked intently at Marie and directly asked why she, an unsuitable lady from a poor family, for whom a trip to the debutante ball was a tidy sum, came to it this year. Without allowing this silence to continue, the Duke looked intently at Marie and directly asked why she, an unsuitable lady from a poor family, for whom a trip to the debutante ball was a tidy sum, came to it this year. Sweat literally streamed down poor Marie's face. Seeing this, the Duke offered her a napkin, mockingly noting that she shouldn't worry so much. Sweat literally streamed down poor Marie's face. Seeing this, the Duke offered her a napkin, mockingly noting that she shouldn't worry so much. Even more embarrassed by the Duke's remark, the girl referred to the heat in the fireplace, but thought to herself that calling the feeling she was experiencing excitement was putting it mildly. Having softened a little from her frightened appearance, he nevertheless continued his interrogation. Well, apparently, the Duke guesses about everything. Questions about her presence at all the ceremonies where his family was present rained down one after another. With each new question, the young Lady Torrin lowered her head lower and lower, admitting that all this was not accidental. With each new question, the young Lady Torrin lowered her head lower and lower, admitting that all this was not accidental. The last straw was the question of her arrival here, to the north, for the purpose of research, which clearly contradicts common sense because with one breath, Marie could have been blown away even by a summer breeze, not to mention the winds of the north and demons swarming everywhere here. Now, Marie had no doubt. He knows that she loves his son and will not hesitate to execute her, because it would hardly be possible to explain that she is just a devoted fan. She will pay dearly for this persecution and such insolence. With her head down, in her embarrassment, Marie practically did not hear what he said next, agreeing to any of his verdicts. Suddenly, the conversation took a different turn, and phrases about impressive devotion, perseverance, and dedication began to reach the girl's ears. Suddenly, the conversation took a different turn, and phrases about impressive devotion, perseverance, and dedication began to reach the girl's ears. Marie asked if she had heard correctly. No, the girl heard everything correctly, and Duke Peter Levry, this unshakable and cold man, in order to put an end to these surveillances, simply offered to enter into a marriage alliance with him. How, half asleep, Lady Torrin reached her chambers in the duchy, where she told her close friend Maid Cat about what had happened. Marie was very depressed. Marrying the father of her idol is very strange, because the Duke was definitely confused and thought that these surveillance and love were addressed to him. However, despite the stupidity of the situation, Cat assured Marie that marrying Duke Peter Levry was not such a bad idea. After all, the lady is already the right age, and he is a prominent couple, a handsome duke, a title, money. After listening to Cat, Marie agreed that there was some truth in her arguments. But since everything is so good, then the most important question remains open, which Cat herself asked, why is he still single and what happened to the Duchess of Levry? After listening to Cat, Marie agreed that there was some truth in her arguments, but since everything is so good, then the most important question remains open, which Kat herself asked, "Why is he still single, and what happened to the Duchess of Levry?" Marie thought about it, replaying the story of Arthur's appearance. It was on the battlefield. The Duke found a little boy and decided to make him his successor. To avoid any questions about adoption, the Duke declared the boy his own child. But people still looked askance, never fully accepting it. And Lady Levry's place was empty. There were those who stood lower in title and sought to gain the name and privileges of the house, but their open hunt for money disgusted the Duke. Therefore, the Duke was adamant in his solitude. Now Marie was embarrassed by the fact that in the novel, Peter never got married, and her character did not exist at all, and the current situation with the upcoming marriage did not fit in with the idea of the novel. These wandering strange thoughts were interrupted by the chatterbox cat, who told one of the gossips about the Duke of Levry, as if he already had a lady of his heart. But he could not make her his wife, although this woman was Arthur's own mother. These wandering, strange thoughts were interrupted by the chatterbox cat, who told one of the gossips about the Duke of Levry, as if he already had a lady of his heart, but he could not make her his wife, although this woman was Arthur's own mother. Marie grinned at this gossip. It is not surprising that there are such speculations around Arthur's mother. It is unlikely that she exists. But if we suddenly assume that this is true, and the Duke had a woman, then why would he propose to her? Without allowing Kat to comb her hair properly, Marie stood up abruptly and resolutely walked towards the Duke. She would refuse to marry him. This would be true, because this is not in the book. As always, the Duke was busy in his office. Marie apologized, suddenly deciding that she should come later and not distract him from his business. But Peter ordered the footman to pour her tea, and noticed that as his future bride, she had no need to apologize, and he was always ready to listen to her. Holding an exquisite cup of aromatic tea in her hands, the girl froze, unable to believe how pleasant, courteous, and attentive the Duke was. Suddenly, thinking that his father was alone, Arthur burst into the office without knocking. Seeing Lady Torrin, he was frightened and immediately began to apologize for the disrespect shown. Marie herself was no less frightened. Her head went spinning. The whole meaning of her life as a fan of Dora stood before her eyes. In the future, strong and beautiful Arthur now stood in front of her as a sweet, timid boy. Fearing for Marie, Peter made a stern reprimand to his son and asked him to come later, without allowing Marie to answer Arthur, so that he would not worry and everything would actually be fine. Helping Lady Torrin stand, the Duke apologized for his son and inquired about the purpose of her coming. After what happened, after she saw Arthur, Marie realized that no, she would become the Duke's wife, only to become the mother of his son. Of course, the Duke will not know this, and Marie only replied that the purpose of her visit was to communicate that she intended to be a good wife. In her chambers, getting ready for bed, the girl told Kat how she saw Arthur and that the wedding would take place, which made her very happy. Having changed her clothes, Marie sat on the bed and again plunged into her thoughts. Now she met Peter, and knowing that in a year he would die, she felt sorry for him. It's a shame because history can't be changed since Peter's death will be a key moment in Arthur's life. On his 11th birthday, his hidden incredible power will come out, and if the father does not sacrifice himself, then the son will not exist, and a novel without the main character is impossible. After this, Arthur will quickly grow up and carry this pain throughout his life, becoming cold and unapproachable, which will be his charm. But not only thoughts of pity overwhelmed Marie, because for another whole year she had to be not only Arthur's mother, but also Peter's wife, and she had to somehow come to terms with this. Habitually putting her hands under the pillow, Marie was surprised to discover that there was no handkerchief embroidered by her personally with a portrait of Arthur. Having searched everything in the room, the girl never found him. Well, embroidering a new scarf is not a problem, and so much worry is just the stress of today. Marie came to terms with the loss, lay down in bed, and tried to sleep. At this time, in his office, in complete darkness, Peter was looking at the handkerchief she had accidentally dropped upon her arrival in the north. The Duke saw not only the clumsy portrait of his son now stroking this embroidery, he couldn't get it out of his head, and the beaming face of a strange young lady who promised to be a good wife for him. The next day, after breakfast, Marie and Kat walked in the garden. Walking along one of the marvelous ducal alleys, they met Arthur. The boy was looking for Marie to apologize again for yesterday's incident when he scared Lady Torrin with his sudden appearance. Without even allowing Marie to say that he was not to blame for anything, Arthur handed her a wreath of flowers that he had woven himself. Handing out this wonderful wreath of blue roses, he was very embarrassed because he thought that compared to her gift in the form of an ancient Hun sword, his response was such a trifle. Marie felt dizzy again. This is a return gift from an idol to a fan. Nothing compares to it. Taking the wreath carefully, like a treasure, she sincerely thanked Arthur. The way he beamed with simple gratitude touched her heart. Seeing how kind Marie was to him, the joyful Arthur invited her to wear the wreath himself. As if he had embraced Marie with a wreath on her head, Arthur had always been a man in her fan heart, cold and strong. But now, communicating with him, so small and looking for affection and kindness, this image disappeared, just as love changed. A different feeling came towards her, tender and maternal. While our young heroes were walking in the garden, Duke Levry received the guest of honor. The old Count Louis Mortec, the husband of his elder sister, expressed unheard-of indignation at the upcoming connection with the inglorious, poor noble family of Torrin. In a rage, the Count insisted that this connection discredited the family, and that all that was needed was to deprive the bastard Arthur of his inheritance in order for decent families of high classes to open the doors to marriage. But the Duke was adamant. Then Count Mortec announced his wife's arrival tomorrow, because it was time to prepare an heir, and according to the contract, training was entrusted to her, and it would be a wonderful opportunity to meet a future relative. In powerless rage, crawling out of the office and hissing like a snake, the Count collided with Arthur at the door. Without even thinking that this was a child, Louis Mortec grimaced in disgust. The life of a bastard boy is not the sweetest, and he often had to endure such treatment, despite the fact that his father is a duke. Seeing Arthur, Peter was very happy. Happy Arthur talked about the gift for Marie in the garden and how glad she was for him. They chatted like father and son. Peter was very glad that his son and bride had become close so quickly, and finally hugging Arthur, he once again felt that this was the reward for his inflexibility. A son is the most important thing in his life. That night Marie hardly slept, still thinking about the wreath, and in the morning she looked very tired, but happy. Kat arrived and joyfully announced that the Duke wanted to have lunch with his future bride. Marie was touched by this ordinary but warm invitation. Peter Levry never ceases to amaze her. In the current person, there was not a drop of that cold arrogance that everyone around is talking about. While dining at a large table in a luxurious, huge hall, Marie furtively looked at Peter. She kept thinking that Kat was right, and he was really very attractive. Seeing these looks, Peter quite calmly remarked that she could look at him whenever she wanted, but it would be nice to eat as well. Of course, he said so because he thinks that she loves him immensely, but her studying glances did not conceal love, but only interest, and Marie, taken by surprise, immediately regretted this too. Surprisingly, the Duke's ego was on the same level as his attentiveness to others, and, after finishing dinner, he invited Marie to take a walk in the garden, as he had learned about her love for flowers. In the garden, the conversation between them again turned to Arthur. The outcome of the conversation made Lady Torrin very happy, because the Duke gave permission to walk with his son at any time. Being so close to Peter, Marie noticed that he looked tired, bags under his eyes, disheveled hair. A little embarrassed, Peter tried to comb his hair with his hand. This cute attempt didn't help. Then Marie stood up on her tiptoes and straightened a lock of the Duke's hair. Looking at Peter's expression, Marie froze for a moment. He looked at her with wide red eyes. She took her breath away, because this is exactly how she imagined Arthur in the novel, and this is exactly how he looked at his beloved at their first meeting, when his heart fluttered. Marie's raised hand slightly opened her wrist, releasing a strange light from there. In an instant, Peter grabbed her hand. He exposed her wrist completely and was surprised to find an unhidden core there carrying light energy. Peter was simply shocked that Lady Torrin, being such an adult girl, had never learned to hide her core. In the universe of the Bren Empire, All Brennians learn from childhood to hide their power cores by absorbing them into their bodies. As descendants of dragons, they have magic. This is the magic of the six energies of fire, water, earth, air, light, and darkness. And the precious core was the source and connecting chain of such power. For example, the Duchy of Levry has great abilities in fire magic. Peter is the most outstanding of this magic. But even though most people do not have the ability to use force, however, anyone can hide this vulnerable spot. Along with damage to the heart or brain, damage to the nucleus could lead to death. In the office, Peter reprimanded Marie for negligence, trying to explain that becoming part of the Duchy of Livry is a big responsibility. First of all, for your life. The family has a lot of enemies. With her hands folded on her knees, Marie obediently listened to him. But her thoughts hovered around the plot of the novel. How wonderful it is that she has the same energy of light as the main character Alicia. Only if she can't even hide the core, then abilities like Alicia's are out of the question. At a crucial moment, she will not be able to take advantage of the gift of healing that this energy brings. Frustrated, Marie told Peter she was worried that she was useless, because if anything happened to Arthur or him, she wouldn't be able to help. Unexpectedly touched by the sincerity of the young girl, the Duke fell at her feet. Confident in his strength, he assured Marie that he would destroy anyone who dared harm his family. Now Lady Torrin, the future Duchess, is also under his protection. Marie looked at Peter sadly. Now she understood why Arthur, until the very last act, yearned for his father, whose devotion and reliability saved his son from death at the cost of his own life. Having released Marie to her chambers, the Duke went down the steps full of sad thoughts. He couldn't stop thinking about her. How difficult it turned out to be to marry a girl with such a pure soul, because now she may be in danger from enemies. It would be easier if she were greedy. After resting a little at home, Marie went out for a walk around the castle. In the Red Hall, she saw a sad Arthur sitting at the table. He said that he was very excited about the arrival of Countess Mortek and the start of training. Marie smiled tenderly. Investing all her tenderness, she took little Arthur by the hand and tried to convince him that there was no reason to worry, because he was a very talented boy. Charmed by Marie's kindness, Arthur confessed how much he wanted Lady Torrin to become his father's wife. Then the father would not be so lonely, and he would have a brother or sister. A brother or sister could become real heirs and relieve him of this burden that he does not like. Suddenly, their cordial conversation was interrupted. Countess Mortek entered the room with her Count and Duke Levry. The footman came in next and bustled about serving dinner. Sitting at the table, the Countess gazed at her brother's young bride. The dry and stern face of the elderly woman expressed arrogance and mockery. After a long, appreciative silence from Countess Mortek, the Countess began to talk. Smiling maliciously, she expressed her extreme surprise at Lady Torrin's lack of feminine dignity since she decided to go such a long way to seduce a man. Before he could continue to hurl harsh barbs at Marie, Peter abruptly cut his sister off by calling her by her first name, Karen, something he only did as a last resort. But Karen Mortek is not one of those women who so easily stops in her goal. She even reprimanded the Duke that it was very unreasonable of him to accept all sorts of ragamuffins into the family, pointing to Marie and Arthur. Attacks towards Arthur were quite frequent from this cruel woman. She considered herself to have the right to do this, since she was almost a mother to Peter, having raised him alone after the early death of his parents. For the same reason, the Duke had to endure her behavior. Unable to continue listening to the Countess's attacks, he invited Lady Torrin and Arthur to go to their room. Marie stopped Peter as he approached and tried to appease the Countess, because she is a link in the family and you can't run away from her. The girl took Arthur's hand and tried to sincerely tell what brought her to this house. Not self-interest, but her heart, to which Countess Mortek smiled sarcastically and noted that in this case, Lady Torrin does not necessarily become the Duke's wife. One can be his woman without concluding an alliance. And this was the last straw of Peter's patience. He exploded with a cry. There was a noise in the dining room, and the brother and sister started a serious quarrel. Seeing how little Arthur shrank all over in a chair, Marie hugged him. Apparently, the child often witnessed such altercations. Feeling warmth and sympathy, Arthur also felt a surge of strength. Without hesitation, he stood up, shielding Lady Torrin with himself, and told the Countess to stop offending her. The Countess exploded with rage. How dare this bastard speak out against her so brazenly? Marie's patience ran out and she shouted at the Countess. Not wanting to participate in this showdown anymore, she coldly and with dignity said goodbye to the Mortek couple and hurried to leave with Arthur. Left with just the three of them, the family spent a long time sorting things out. Countess Mortek angrily expressed her opinion regarding the choice of the Duke. Peter listened calmly to his older sister, and then he coldly told her to humble herself, otherwise he would not look at their relationship. Without allowing her to object any further, he put on his cloak and left the dining room, finally saying that this was her last warning. After taking a walk and cooling down properly, Peter entered the nursery late at night. In the room, Lady Torrin, sitting on a chair and bowing her head on the bed, slept peacefully. After an unsuccessful dinner, Marie took Arthur to his bedroom. She knew that throughout the novel, Arthur would have to constantly experience the rudeness of his relatives, and all she could do now was to give him as much warmth and love as possible. They had a heart-to-heart talk, and Marie offered to stay with him until he fell asleep. Peter took off his cloak and threw it over the sleeping girl. He took a chair and sat down next to her. Resting his chin, he looked at her and remembered the evening before, how dignified she had behaved. Marie felt someone's presence and opened her eyes. Her sleepy and gentle face was so close. Peter recoiled in fear, making a noise with his chair. Marie put a finger to her lips, making a sign to be quieter, and they left. In the corridor, Marie returned the cloak and a conversation took place between them, during which Peter tried to apologize for his sister, and Lady Marie assured the Duke that she was not at all offended by the Countess, as she understood her values and position. Peter noted that understanding will not always be a solution, and she must behave like a duchess, which means being side by side with him, and if she has to defend her opinion, despite the titles. Once again, Marie was surprised by the frankness of Duke Livry's intentions and his concern for her. The next day, Arthur had classes with the Countess. The Countess arrived exactly at 12 and without unnecessary tenderness threw a stack of books on the table. Coldly, she stated that he should take notes on all the books and then take a test on them. Taking advantage of the moment alone, Arthur decided to ask the Countess something. He asked her to be kinder to Lady Torrin, in return for which he would study with great diligence and carry out all her instructions. He also apologized for his rudeness towards her yesterday. Seeing the child's devotion, the Countess decided to play on little Arthur's feelings. She got into character and began to act like a very offended person. With an insidious play on words, she extracted a confession of guilt from the child. And if he wants her to treat Lady Torrin kinder, then he, as a diligent student, must humbly accept punishment for bad behavior. For the sake of Marie, Arthur was ready to endure anything. He meekly agreed to accept the punishment, which is what the Countess wanted. She triumphantly ordered the child to take off his shoes and kneel on the table. At this time, work was in full swing in the Duke's office. With all her might, under the strict guidance of Peter, Lady Torrin tried to master her power. But she absolutely couldn't do it, and once again she collapsed on the table, lamenting her uselessness. The core never hid under the skin. Peter tried to calm her down, because a third of the Brennians cannot properly use their abilities. Only the more purebred descendants of dragons have this ability. Gently touching her core, he demonstrated this to her. The crystal shone under his fingers, and Marie felt warmth in her hands. This demonstration of strength saddened the girl even more, because she realized that she could not reach such a level because she could not simply hide the core. Again, trying to cheer her up, he told her that she didn't need to force herself if nothing was working out at all. Marie sighed. People with the energy of light are very rare, and it's a pity that the gift is wasted. Now it is not surprising that the main character of the novel, Alicia White, perfectly possessed precisely this energy. Arthur had incredible abilities, but the energies in his body often collided, opposing each other and causing severe pain and agony. The people of light could not completely remove these manifestations. They could only alleviate his suffering a little. And only Alicia was a stabilizer for Arthur who could completely cleanse him of self-destruction. She was the only savior of the main character. Peter broke Marie's sad silence. He said that there was no need to worry so much about the lack of abilities because her strength would never be useful, and he himself was not one of those irresponsible husbands who leave their wives succumbing to death. Marie sadly looked into his eyes and squeezed his hand tightly, because he doesn't know what he's talking about. He only has a year left. Exhausting and useless training was replaced by a peaceful walk with Arthur in the garden. The boy walked slowly, shifting from foot to foot. Marie thought he was very tired after class and suggested canceling the walk. Little Arthur, despite the terrible pain in his legs, said that he was fine, but Lady Torrin, in his opinion, looked worried. Marie brushed off that her worries were nothing. She decided not to reveal her secret to Arthur so that he would not worry, but a careless movement opened her wrist, revealing her core. The child was very surprised, because he had never seen a nucleus in an adult. Arthur began to calm Marie down and asked her not to be upset about this because now he, like his father, would protect her. After the walk, Marie called Kat over. Having prepared a small bag of jewelry, she handed it to her with instructions to find out from the maids how Arthur was treated in the castle. Kat didn't have to investigate for long, because immediately leaving Lady Torrin's chambers, she came across two maids whispering about the incident in the library. Savvy Kat realized that this was what was needed and got to work. After very little time, she returned to Marie and told her about Arthur's punishment and about the terrible details, which said that from the brutal blows of the Countess, there was a lot of blood on the floor. Because of this, the water with which they washed the floor was completely red. Memories from Marie's past life, when she was Dora, began to emerge one after another. She understood Arthur very well because her father bullied her and her mother was constantly under stress. So little Dora often had to endure beatings. A lot of time has passed since then, and Dora seems to have forgiven her parents. But the pain and sediment remained forever in the depths of her soul. She felt an even stronger connection between herself and Arthur. No, she will not be able to be friends with the Countess, even if she changes at the end of the novel. This is beyond Marie's understanding. Karen Mortek needed to be put in place, and the girl went to the Countess. At this evening time, the Duke's sister traditionally drank tea. Seeing Marie enter, she noticed that the tea was just finishing, and kindly offered Lady Torrin to serve her. Marie, ignoring such impudence, went straight to the point. With her hands folded across her chest, she firmly asked whether the Countess had beaten her son. An unpleasant conversation took place between them. The Countess was mad with rage. Marie expressed everything she thought about the Countess and her manners. At the end of the conversation, Marie warned Countess Mortek not to let another hair fall from Arthur's head, and leaving the room, she added that as soon as she became Duchess of Levry, on the same day the Countess's feet would be torn to shreds. Outside the door, Marie burst into tears. Her strength left her. These tears were not because of the Countess, not because of fear. It was a feeling of guilt for little Arthur, who suffered pain for her, and it swallowed her completely. Oh, how could she be so inattentive? In the corridor, Kat came across a crying Marie. She brought bandages and ointment to the young master because she learned that the servants in the castle behaved as if he were not there. Kat realized that now it would be much more important for the lady to be with Arthur and handed her a basket of medicine. In the nursery, Marie, caring for his wounds, did not stop crying. The next day in his office, Peter studied the history of the Torrin family. Everyone knows that if a husband and wife have different magical energies, then the child is born with the stronger element. He was surprised to discover that the Torrin clan, in order to preserve its element as the weakest of the 6 energies, never married people of other elements. The family believed that through the element, their ancestress, a soothsayer with great power of light, would return to them. The return of the owner with the incredible power of light was supposed to save the empire from destruction. And although Peter thought that this was nonsense from 500 years ago, he could not help but agree with the miracle that Marie herself was almost buried alive and woke up in a coffin at her funeral. His thoughts were interrupted by his older sister bursting into his room. She screamed in rage, complaining about Lady Torrin's rude behavior. Peter knew that Marie must have had a good reason for such behavior, so he realized that Arthur was severely punished by the Countess. The Duke immediately went to his son and found him in the dining room with Marie. Without hesitation, the Duke crouched at his son's feet and took off his shoes to look at the wounds. All elements, regardless of their energies, are capable of absorbing pain, but unlike the element of light, they also damaged themselves. Bright light flooded the room as the father absorbed his son's pain. Marie screamed, trying to stop Peter. She knew that these constant absorptions would eventually kill him. When evening came, Marie came to Arthur's room because at dinner he asked her to sleep with him that night. Before going to bed, they had a nice conversation. Arthur looked very happy and a little excited. And only after Peter entered the room, Marie understood the reason for his excitement. He specially invited his father, and it was a plan for them to all sleep together, as a family should. Marie was embarrassed by this event because such things were too frank, but she could not refuse Arthur. Peter was also quite surprised, but mistakenly concluded that these were Lady Torrhen's tricks in wanting to be closer to him, which confused her even more. Arthur lay down between them and continually dreamed of the wonderful life that would come when his father and Marie got married. He asked his father and Marie not to leave, even after he fell asleep. The new family fell asleep safely. That night, Marie dreamed of Arthur. She couldn't help but admire him. He was so handsome, broad shoulders, tall figure. He hugged her and affectionately called her mom. Tears appeared in Marie's sleep. This moment was so real, as if the adult Arthur was really nearby. But suddenly he began to call her by name, again and again. It sounded so clear that it made Marie wake up. Opening her eyes, she was surprised to find that little Arthur was gone, and she was in the arms of a giggling Peter, who woke her up by calling her name. She recoiled from him in horror and embarrassment. Laughing and straightening his shirt, he said that there was no need to pretend that it was he who was sticking to her. Shocked, Marie assured that this was an accident. The Duke's next chuckle at this argument was followed by an offer of a prize for best acting role. Marie took several more attempts to explain that it was a misunderstanding, but it was useless. The Duke's pride completely refused to believe her words. Leaving the room and leaving Marie in complete bewilderment, he inspiredly concluded that if it had not been for a busy day, he would not have woken her up, and that they would definitely continue next time. However, as soon as Peter walked out, his bragging instantly disappeared. Thoughts about Marie's frankness were confused with thoughts about her sincerity. Was it really a coincidence with a dream or a game to touch him? Putting aside these torments, he headed to the reception hall, where his vassals were waiting for him. The wedding was on the agenda. Peter expected resistance to his decision to marry, but all the vassals were as calm as ever. And only at the end of the meeting did he learn the true reason for this calm. This reason plunged the Duke into shock, which he did not show, although he was extremely hurt by such news. Having conspired, the vassals, led by Count Mortek, came up with a condition according to which Lady Torrhen, when marrying the Duke, had to pay 8 billion bronze of dowry, thereby showing that she was worthy of the name Levry, which was essentially a death sentence for the wedding, since the poor Torrhen family could not have had such an exorbitant sum. Peter decided that insisting on a wedding without these conditions would be extremely weak and unwise. Such a circumstance could cause a riot. Peter agreed to their condition. He would still find the money for her. But for the future, he said that if anyone shows disrespect to his wife, who paid such a huge amount of dowry, then everyone will be held responsible. Later that day, Duke Levry sat with Lady Torrhen. The Duke's head was torn because he had to get the money somewhere. Marie looked at his feet and still decided to break this silence by asking if his feet hurt after the absorption. The Duke, in his mocking manner, replied that she would probably like to apply ointment to her feet and bandage them, which once again put the girl into a stupor. But due to his lack of mood, he did not continue to make fun of Marie and simply said that the pain absorbed does not necessarily manifest itself physically. Marie did not further develop the topic of absorption. She did not even want to mentally return to the fact that, absorbing Arthur's internal wounds and mental disorder, he would die in a year, and she changed the topic. She asked a question about the result of the conversation with the vassals. Peter expected anything when he said for the dowry of 8 billion bronzes, tears, curses, but not sparkling eyes and a sweet smile. However, he did not immediately notice her reaction, as he went on to think that he would need to sell hidden assets and forge documents so that no one knew about his financing of the Torrhen family. And even more so, he never expected to hear from Marie that there was nothing to worry about and her family could afford it. When the Duke finally noticed her beaming face, he asked in amazement where she would get that kind of money. Well, it's unlikely that the Duke will understand that 3 years ago, she was reborn from a Dora fan into the body of Marie Torin, and in order to allow herself to continue leading her fan life, all she did during this time was accumulate wealth. Therefore, it is better for her to say that she will ask for money from Baron Edward Bright, the sponsor of their family, or simply Ed. The ease of Marie mentioning such an influential person and calling the Baron by his nickname Ed brought Peter to various suspicions. Seething with a feeling of jealousy, he asked what connected her and the Baron. And this is the second point that will be incomprehensible to the Duke, because Baron Edward Bright is her alter ego. When she started getting rich, she needed a front persona so that she could interact with the rich, elderly hands of the empire. So she came up with Baron Bright, who existed only on paper. And if meetings on financial issues were necessary, Marie would send a trusted representative. It's hardly time to reveal such details, so she tried to assure the Duke as convincingly as possible that the relationship between her and the Baron was only a relationship between a sponsor and a ward, but nothing more. Such non-explanatory assurances did not suit Peter one bit. What sponsor would calmly fork out 8 billion Brontes for a poor young girl? Then Marie realized that it was really difficult to understand from the outside and decided to play solely on trust. Pretending to be offended to the core, she said that if there is no trust before the wedding, then how will they live further? A little confused, the Duke noticed that his distrust was not towards her, but towards the Baron, and that it was possible that such sponsorship could have hidden intentions. In this regard, let her not ask Edward Bright for money. Peter will sell the diamond mines and cover the dowry with them. Of course, how could he know that these mines are an important part of the plot? In the future, this is the place of the first meeting of Alicia and Arthur. Then Marie decided to more firmly stop his resistance, pointing out that the wedding was a matter of two people, and the question of the dowry was solely on her. And so, as not to hear his objections anymore, she hurriedly left the room. Anger towards the rich patron of his future wife simply tore Peter apart. No, he still won't leave it like that. He won't let her pay for the dowry with some strange man's money. The Duke jumped up from his chair and headed to the door. He will immediately put up the diamond mines for sale, and he would have done it if he had not met little Arthur in the corridor. Peter wanted to tell his son that he was very busy, but his gaze fell on the handkerchief he was holding in his hands. The same scarf with Arthur's face embroidered that Marie dropped on the day of her arrival in the north. Peter took the handkerchief and, looking closer, asked where his son got it. Arthur happily announced that this was a gift from Lady Torin, which she had embroidered herself. Now she is leaving the castle on urgent business, and so that he would not be sad, she presented him with this scarf. When giving the gift, Lady Torin said that he was the sweetest, most charming, and wonderful child. It was pouring rain late in the evening. Satisfied with the resolution of financial issues, Marie returned to the castle with Kat. While Kat got ready to prepare her bath, Marie headed to her room. When she went inside, she found pitch darkness. A sudden lightning illuminated the figure of Peter, who was sitting in the far corner in a chair by the window, his whole posture indicating that a serious conversation was ahead. Under the rumble of thunder, he lit the candles with his gaze and coldly asked about the reason for her absence. Perplexed, the girl replied that she needed to settle issues regarding the dowry because they agreed that she would do this. Peter muttered that he had not agreed on such a thing and added that now there was a more important question for her. With these words, he took out a handkerchief with Arthur's portrait and threw it on the table, indicating that this was not the handkerchief that had been given to Arthur in the morning. In fear, squeezing her skirt with her hands, Marie froze in place. She recognized her lost scarf. The Duke, continuing to share the results of his little investigation, took out an anonymous note sent with the gong sword. As you know, he regarded this gift to Arthur as a veiled message for him. But now, when he reread the note several times, sparkling with all the words she now calls Arthur, he realized that the gift was really addressed to his son, and not to him. Marie gathered her courage, took off her cloak, and sat down on the sofa. How can I explain to my father that all this is pure, sincere, healthy fanaticism for his son, that he doesn't mean anything ambiguous? Dripping with sweat, she began to say that her actions were only from the best intentions. Being one of the smartest people in the empire and capable of seeing deeper than others, the Duke, despite such a threatening start to the conversation, immediately agreed with her. If he had noticed even the shadow of something inappropriate regarding his son, he would have instantly destroyed anyone, including her. And all that Peter wanted to find out now was how one can love so devotedly and selflessly without receiving anything in return. It's as if a stone fell from Marie's shoulders. Does he really understand her? But it is impossible to explain such an ability in pure love. And she modestly replied that this is her essence. Having softened, Peter saw that all this was true. Now he felt ashamed of his behavior the day before regarding the Baron, because he also has his own secrets, and one of them was the origin of Arthur. Peter sat down next to Marie. Such a pure, sweet, and loving creature. He gently ran his hand through her hair and promised to try to give her all the love she had for him in return. Marie shuddered. No, he still didn't understand anything, and the burden of this misunderstanding has not gone away. It seems that her fanaticism is beyond comprehension. Peter is still sure that she devotedly loves him. Seeing all the sincerity of her intentions, the Duke's mind calculated that her son was not a trick or a hook, simply, in his opinion, being a part of Peter. She also loved Arthur. In the morning, Peter entered Marie's room. Today, he decided to change the situation and conduct classes with her because for the second week of training to awaken energy, there were no results. He saw the pills on the bedside table and asked health of Lady Torrin. Marie assured that everything was fine. She had been taking them since childhood, as she had a weak body. Peter looked carefully at the transparent jar without a label and asked if she knew what she was taking. Marie replied that apparently these were dietary supplements and that there was no need to worry, because they were sent from the church itself. Then he chuckled with dissatisfaction and touched her thin hand. Such concern from the church aroused his suspicions. The Duke found the church's reaction to his marriage, which he told Marie about, even more suspicious. When he sent news of the marriage to the church, no one answered him. But when the news was repeated, in which the name of Lady Torrin was mentioned, the clergy immediately announced that they would urgently come with congratulations. He ended his story by asking if she knew anyone from the church. Marie shook her head. She is a character who is not in the novel, and if she knew anyone from the church, it was only as the reader Dora. But as Marie, she did not know anyone from the church. The Duke then made the logical conclusion that, apparently, her father was on very good terms with the clergy. Baron Torrin was a special person for Marie, a loving and wonderful father whom she missed so much in her previous life. And the fact that through him she was connected with the church, an integral part of the novel, all this time inspired even more respect for him. In the evening, Duke Levry was busy with papers. Much still needed to be prepared for the wedding, and many elementalists of air and earth had to be sent with the news. But a sudden guest interrupted him. To Peter's great surprise, it was Baron Eric Torrin. As the father of his future wife, the Duke was extremely polite and attentive. The Baron was grateful for the respect shown, but sadly delivered bad news. He had come to pick up his daughter. At dawn, an alarmed Peter woke Marie. He said that due to the preservation of the element of light in the family, the Baron refuses to marry Marie to him, as he plans to marry her to someone else. This information greatly surprised the girl because her body was unsuitable for passing on family tradition. Her father always told her that she could marry anyone, because the preservation of the element was entrusted to her cousin. Marie didn't understand why now he suddenly changed his mind. While talking, Marie and Peter did not notice how little Arthur entered the room. He was very upset because he realized that Lady Torrin was being taken away by her father. Marie's heart was bleeding from children's tears. Hugging Arthur, she calmed him down, explaining that this was a misunderstanding and she would not go anywhere. Suddenly, Baron Torrin entered the room. While talking with her father, Marie was very angry. She couldn't let Arthur cry, couldn't let his hopes be dashed because he was so looking forward to this event. In her hearts, Marie threatened that she would kill herself if her father did not consent to the marriage. This daughter's position greatly upset the Baron, and he asked to talk to her alone. As soon as the Duke and his son left, Baron Torrin began to anxiously ask his daughter if she was taking her medication regularly. Marie didn't understand what was happening because they had just discussed the wedding and suddenly he began to worry about the medications. Peter's words about whether she knew what medications she was taking sounded clearly in her head. The conclusions suggested themselves. Something is fishy here. The church, which supplied her with strange medicines but never contacted her, suddenly wants to make a visit before the wedding. Her father, who suddenly changed his plans for her regarding the preservation of the element and refuses to marry her to the Duke. Marie urgently needed to find out what these pills were, so she assured her father of taking them regularly and pretended to agree to think about canceling the wedding, thereby calming his vigilance. At the door, pacing nervously, the Duke waited for the result of their conversation. Having said goodbye to the Baron, Marie said that if she did not persuade her father, she would simply remove her name from the imperial register, forever erasing herself from the family, on paper, of course. But the primary task now was to find out the composition of the medicine. She took out several tablets and gave them to Peter with a request to conduct research. The Duke said that in half a day they would have the result. He gently stroked her head and promised to return soon. While Marie was waiting for the result, she was thinking about the plot of the novel, about her character, and about the church. To find out why during these 3 years she never suspected the pill, she decided to write everything down on paper. Firstly, the pills were sent from the church, and the church, as the central attribute of the novel, was an unambiguous source of good, because people of light serve in it. They take care of those in need and heal people. Secondly, in the first days, when she missed taking pills, she felt terribly ill. Her heart ached severely, and she became convinced that, indeed, her body was not able to function normally. But if we still assume that the church had unclean intentions, then why would they feed pills to some unknown girl who was not even mentioned in the novel, who has no energy so much that she cannot even hide the core? In the novel, the main character, Alicia, is directly connected with the church, and according to Arthur himself, she is an angel in the flesh. Although these were his own thoughts, like the entire novel, which was written in the first person, from the point of view of Arthur himself. Therefore, here Marie built a logical connection of trust in the church and in the pills all these 3 years. Because if Arthur himself believed that the church and Alicia were good, then she, as a reader, believed in it. Now, being inside the events, it is possible that everything could be completely different, and the church was an evil organization deceiving Arthur. After all, that question, before her death as Dora, which she was going to ask the author, was never asked. And this question was, why is the novel called The Mask? It now became clear to Marie that, in addition to knowing Arthur as the narrator, everything she knew about each character in the novel could simply be a lie. At the very climax of her guesses, Marie was interrupted by Peter bursting into the room. Unable to restrain his emotions, he attacked her with the question of why she was taking this medicine, because it was the one that suppressed her energy. It is this medicine that does not release energy so much that all this time she could not even hide the core. Marie said that taking medication was necessary because of her illness, because if she forgot to take it, unbearable pain in her heart began. The Duke explained that this was natural, because the energy forcibly restrained inside came out and thereby caused pain. The most important thing here was to endure. The first thing Marie thought about was her father, whom she loved and trusted. She could not believe that her father was involved in the affairs of the church. Perhaps he was also used, and, without knowing anything, he fed his daughter with these pills. Peter suggested not excluding the involvement of the Baron, since it is not without reason that he is against this marriage. In the entire empire, only the imperial family and the Duchy of Levry can conduct an investigation into the activities of the church. And if Marie married the Duke, sooner or later the story of the inability to hide the core would have surfaced, and Peter, as a husband, would have dealt with this. However, even without being in this status, he will immediately begin the investigation and punish all those involved. But during the investigation, Marie should under no circumstances return home with the Baron. The church can take retaliatory steps and begin to clear its tracks. Since she cannot stay here of her own free will without her father's consent, they will have to play a theater in which the evil Duke will hold Lady Torrin against her will. From now on, she will be locked in this room without the opportunity to see anyone. Neither Kat nor Arthur will be able to visit her. Only Peter's personal servants and himself. Marie listened to the excited Peter, still not believing what was happening. Could even the devoted Kat turn out to be a spy? It seems that the only one she can trust now is Peter, because he sacrificed his life for Arthur and will do everything for her well-being. According to Peter, during this time it was important to release the energy, and judging by the fact that the church was personally involved in suppressing it, its power is great. While she is in fictitious captivity, no one will be able to see the changes happening to her. Trusting Peter completely, Marie gave him the pills. Well, now all we have to do is wait. Already that same evening, Baron Torin was unable to get to his daughter, and Duke Levry had no choice but to pretend to be a villain. After stopping the pills, Marie did not have to wait long for the release of her light energy. She only had to miss 2 doses during the day when the attack happened. It happened at night. She was lying in bed and could not sleep. Her thoughts were constantly hovering around Arthur and the plot of the novel, when suddenly a terrible pain squeezed her heart. Thousands of needles pierced him at once. In desperation, she literally hung on the bedside bell so that someone could come to her help. Peter burst into the room a minute after he was informed about this. Clinging to him, Marie, choking in pain and washing herself with tears, begged for pills. Peter saw how bad she was, how her body was breaking. He tried to console her with words, but it did nothing. In horror, he looked at her agony. She couldn't cope. She couldn't hesitate any longer. Peter knelt on the bed and hugged Marie tightly. Instantly, an incredibly strong pain pierced his body. Realizing that Peter was absorbing her pain, Marie immediately tried to push him away because this is her karma, her path. He has no need to suffer like that. But Peter only pressed Marie harder, because the pain he felt was so unbearable that he simply could not let her experience it again. A couple of moments later, weakened, he leaned on Marie. Poor selfless Duke. He was the same as in the novel. He also saved Arthur, who had lost control of his energy. A year later, he will die defending his son, and now he suffers for her. These thoughts about his selflessness came with a new wave of sobs, with wild regret that she was the cause of his pain. When everything passed, Marie promised herself that she would never let him experience something like this again. The very next morning, Marie managed to hide the core. Peter was very surprised by this fact. How much energy does she have if immediately after the cancellation of the suppressors on the first try, she managed to hide the core? And to what extent can her abilities grow? Peter remembered the Torin family's prophecy. In the entire history of the Empire, there was one person who developed the abilities of the light element to the highest level, abilities far beyond purification and healing. And that was the holy maiden Priscilla Torin, who lived 500 years ago. Priscilla prophesied about her rebirth, and if this is so, and she was reborn in Marie, then great trials awaited the Empire. That day the Duke was doing his paperwork in her room. Peter referred to the heat in his office, but Marie knew that this was not the reason, and he was here so that she would not get bored. Marie read a manual on managing abilities. She certainly had to develop her abilities in order to help Arthur and Peter at a crucial moment. But she was endlessly distracted. Looking at the Duke, he now seemed so incredible to her. Marie saw on the table one of the ancient manuscripts that Peter was studying. It depicted a holy virgin. It is very strange that the story of the Holy Maiden was never mentioned in the novel, although the maiden was the only owner of the power of light of the 3rd stage in the history of the Empire. Peter, noticing her thoughtful look, put the papers aside and asked if she knew anything about the Holy Virgin. Marie told only the story she knew well from her father, that the family was saving the element of light for the rebirth of their ancestor, the Holy Virgin Priscilla Torin. Then Peter shared his thoughts. He believed that it was possible that the Holy Virgin could be reincarnated at the moment in Marie's body, because the pain she experienced was directly proportional to the amount of energy released. Reincarnation is also indicated by the Church's involvement in suppressing its energy. It is doubtful, but if we assume that the Church's participation was with the best intentions, then one of the motives for blocking its energy was to prevent war. Because the highest 3rd stage of development of the ability of light is suppression of all other external forces. and the appearance of the Holy Virgin would inevitably create strife for the right to own this power. He finds no other explanation for the Church's action. Marie thought about it. She knew a lot from the novel about the power of light. She knew that Alicia, Arthur's lover, was at the second stage with the ability to absorb and distribute power. And even with such abilities, she was recognized as a saint. This was only the second stage of development, and there were already dozens of ill-wishers who wanted to harm Alicia. But the third stage of Priscilla Torin was truly incomprehensible. It made it possible to deactivate any attacks from other elements. Why is there not a word about this ability in the novel? The thought of Priscilla's reincarnation in her gave Marie strength. Now, by training hard, she may have time to reach the level necessary to help on that tragic day. If everything goes well, then she will be able to reach the first level, at which external and internal wounds are treated. But test subjects were needed for training. Just then, Peter cut himself slightly with a piece of paper. "This is luck." Marie clung to his hand with delight, but no matter how she tried, the cut did not disappear. Seeing her efforts, Peter began to joke a little, and then condescendingly asked her not to rush. The skill would come, but later. But his words against her persistence were simply nothing. In despair, Marie licked his finger. Peter pulled his hand away in horror, but Marie was not the least bit embarrassed, declaring that saliva had a sterilizing effect. Marie was a little upset about the failure, but cheered herself up that there was still a year before Arthur's powerful power awakened. Although maybe a year this is not so much, because Arthur's ability was to control all forces except the elements of light and darkness, and at least a very developed first stage was required. Marie's second opportunity to try her hand and heal her wounds was not long in coming. Little Arthur appeared at the door. Both Marie and Arthur missed each other very much. Wanting to please Lady Torin, he brought her a bouquet of flowers. It was a very beautiful bouquet, but the thorns of the roses pricked his fingers. Without wasting any time, Marie took his hands in hers. A flash of light illuminated the room. Arthur's wounds disappeared. This is how Arthur learned that Marie had managed to hide the core and finally practice her powers. Marie immediately healed Peter's wounds, who was a little jealous of the fact that she discovered her abilities on her son and not on him. Under the perplexed glances of his son and Lady Torin, the Duke hurried away. After her imprisonment, Marie stood at the window. Today was a special day. The day the delegation from the church arrived. Despite the fact that the imprisonment lasted only 4 days, they seemed like an eternity to her. Much has changed in her worldview during this time. It has now become clear that the church, as the central organization representing good in the novel, is under great suspicion. People of the element of light serve in the church, worshipping their ancestor Dragon Balbor. Those who do not have magical abilities perform their service at the everyday level. Those with first-level abilities become priests. Those fortunate enough to have level 2 abilities can become pastors. Naturally, the pastor is the central figure of the church, the supreme benefactor who can harness the power of restoration. But, surprisingly, in the novel, the pastor was a man with absolutely no power. A man whose kindness and honesty were so great that they allowed him to ascend to such a high rank. And this man's name is Iolaus Shetter. According to Arthur, Iolaus was a man of extraordinary kindness and always appeared in the saddest moments. Lending a helping hand, he practically replaced his deceased father. And it was Iolaus who brought Alicia to the temple. Now, being under suspicion and based on the title of the novel, the church was an evil organization, and the kindest and brightest person in it, according to all canons, should be the worst person in the world. Duke Levry entered the room, looking incredibly handsome in his uniform and decorations. He had to try very hard to distract the staring Lady Torin. Peter said that representatives of the church had already arrived, and that the most interesting thing was that Pastor Iolaus himself was here. If such a high-ranking person did not disdain to come, then the church must have big plans for Marie. The Duke extended his hand to her, so that no matter what happens, he will protect her. Determined to confront the looming threat, they went out to meet the spiritual delegation. Pastor Iolaus was very nice at dinner. Based on the fact that in the novel he had already reached middle age, now he looked like an angel in the flesh. And as befits an angel, he behaved accordingly. It did not escape his sensitive gaze that Arthur was uncomfortable using adult equipment. He gently expressed his wishes to the Duke of Levry, regarding the inapplicability of disapproving methods of detaining Marie. He expressed regret that Baron Torin did not give his blessing to the marriage. And in the end, he finished off Marie and Peter, saying that he himself would personally try to persuade the Baron to agree, because a marriage between the family of the defenders of the Empire in the person of Levry and the family of the Holy Family in the person of Torin was just a great idea. Marie and Peter even thought for a while that they had been mistaken in their suspicions. But with his next sentence, the pastor dispelled their doubts. He expressed his desire to baptize Marie before marriage. Since her body is very weak, he brought with him many high-ranking priests who would be happy to share pure energy with her. There is a wonderful temple in the duchy, and the ceremony can be held today. After some thought, Marie decided to be baptized, since she saw no other way to find out any information about the pastor and find his weak points. Peter agreed unhappily. After lunch, Peter led Marie to the temple, and in order for the pastor to behave as naturally as possible, she asked Peter not to attend the ceremony. Peter didn't like this plan, but he made concessions to his future wife. They agreed that he would stay outside the door, and if something happened, she would call him. Already at the very door, Peter could no longer feign ease. He was worried and stopped Marie, who took the handle. Leaning over, he said that even if she just felt uncomfortable, because there would be 30 priests there, led by a pastor, she should definitely call him. Marie gratefully agreed and went inside. The huge vaults of Prince Cramler's hall opened up to Lady Torin's gaze. It was a grandiose and beautiful structure, which was mentioned several times in the novel. Pastor Iolaus met Marie on the path and asked why Duke Levry did not come to the ceremony. Marie replied that this was not necessary, and the baptism could begin. Then Pastor Iolaus took her hands and, leaning almost to her very face, uttered words of blessing. After his words, Sister Carolyn came up and took Marie's hands. Bright flashes of light illuminated the temple. Marie felt the power of restoration acting, taking away all her fatigue. Seeing how the girl lit up, Pastor Iolaus immediately apologized for his lack of strength and inability to share energy with her. Of course, Marie remembered how, in the novel, the pastor was always worried about his inability to unlock his power and thereby help Arthur, who was suffering from pain. Remembering her sobs when she read this chapter, Marie somehow thought that Iolaus was truly a good person, and the church was drugging her for a very good reason and was not trying to kill her. The priests came up one by one and shared their power with her until it was the last one's turn. The last priest was different from the rest and looked very gloomy and unfriendly. When he touched her hands, he sharply grabbed her left wrist, twisting it outward. Pastor Iolaus pulled Marie's hand away. Marie recoiled from the pastor in horror. They know which hand the core is on, and they checked to see if it was hidden. Pastor Iolaus tried to calm her down, pretending that he did not understand what had happened. Marie screamed that she had the strength to help Peter. After what happened, the church would not convince her of its kindness. In a second, the temple door flew out from the explosion. Marie ran up to Peter and told him what happened, that she was grabbed tightly by her left wrist. Pastor Iolaus, completely perplexed, asked Lady Torin to come to her senses, because a misunderstanding between the Duke and the Church could affect their cooperation and harm the Empire. He asked Marie how the priest behaved, whether he was rude, and if so, he would be punished. Peter looked angrily at the pastor and was about to say something to him, but the pastor interrupted him, asking his lordship to calm down and not make hasty decisions, but to listen to him. Surprisingly, Peter remained silent and Iolaus continued. He said that Lady Torin was most likely simply uncomfortable due to so much physical contact, and it is unlikely that the priest had bad intentions, and for everything that happened here he takes personal responsibility. Marie looked at this theater with displeasure, confident that Peter would not leave these antics just like that. But Peter turned to her and asked her again whether such a noise was simply due to the fact that her hand was just squeezed. Marie, shocked by what was happening, looked at Peter unable to say anything because the intentions of the church should be obvious to him as well as to her. Priest Carolyn approached them and asked to examine Lady Torin's injury. Duke Levry agreed with her and told Marie that an examination now would be very useful, but the girl fearfully refused, pressing her hand to herself. Then Peter coldly told the pastor to be more careful next time and go out with Lady Torin. In her room, Marie immediately began to find out from the Duke what these indifferent remarks of his meant. Was it really not clear that such a grip on the wrist, on which the cannonball was on, threatened with death if they squeezed the hand a little harder? But Peter kept saying the same thing over and over again, as if it were an accident, as if he had been programmed. And then it dawned on Marie. He really might be brainwashed now. All this needed to be carefully thought through, and she hastily sent the Duke out, asking him to sit in his room and not contact representatives of the church. Later, she herself would come to him. She took pen and paper and line by line began to write down her hypotheses. The first hypothesis was that Peter was brainwashed. The second hypothesis concerned the fact that it was Pastor Iolaus who brainwashed the Duke. But the image of Iolaus, an honest priest without any abilities, who somehow brainwashed Duke Levry, the strongest man in the empire, did not fit here. But what if he had the ability for the second hypothesis? Developing the second hypothesis, Marie reflected on the stages of one of the very interesting energies, the first stage of which is brainwashing. The washing effect at this stage is short-term in nature in the form of orders and manipulations and requires maintaining eye contact. And this is exactly how everything looked in the temple. These short orders are not so safe, since if they are repeated several times, the victim can remember this protocol forever. Marie suddenly remembered Arthur's words, in which he said that Pastor Iolaus often asked him to look into his eyes, and after that he was not afraid of either battles or monsters. The second stage of this ability was control of the dead, and in the novel, she definitely remembered some suspicious part connected with this, but she decided to return to it later. And finally, the third stage of this ability was complete mind control, the ability to control multiple targets and give orders to anyone without eye contact. All ministers of the church are people of the element of light, with abilities or not. But since, from early childhood, the element is hidden from prying eyes, the fact of the presence of this element of light in people who do not demonstrate their skills cannot be proven. The conclusion for Marie suggested itself. All the steps mentioned were abilities belonging to the dark element, and the presence of the element of light was never mentioned by Pastor Iolaus. So 2 hypotheses led to the third. It turns out that the high priest of the church, the minister of light, Pastor Iolaus Shetter, is a carrier of the dark element. Marie simply admired the author's idea. What a wonderful deception for readers, which precisely reflects the title of the novel. Now, the first thing to do was to avoid Iolaus and not look him in the eye. Although there was a moment in the hall when he looked into her eyes, the order did not sound then. Something apparently prevented him from doing this. Since it is possible that Marie is the reincarnation of Priscilla Torin, her light energy, developed to the third stage with the ability to nullify, can nullify the powers of Iolaus. Knowing this, he will try to kill her, but then the question arose, how did Iolaus know that she would reach the final stage? Marie was thinking intensely. So many thoughts were tearing her head apart at the same time. But to confirm this theory, something urgently needed to be tested. Since Iolaus was unable to give her an order, it was most likely due to Priscilla's reincarnation, which means she should at least already be able to use the power of absorption and be able to clear the Duke's mind. She opened the door to head towards Peter and bumped into him. Marie decided to act immediately. There was no time to waste. Pressing the confused Peter against the wall, she muttered that she would help him. The Duke resisted, not understanding what was happening, but Marie asked the Duke not to move. Standing on her tiptoes, she reached towards him. From the novel, Marie remembered how Alicia restored Arthur's mental balance by touching her forehead to his and tried to reproduce these actions. Peter froze and then reached out to her. Mistaking her intentions, he kissed the girl. Marie's eyes widened in surprise. Peter's tender lips and strange feelings in the depths of her heart drew her into a kiss. When suddenly something inside Marie rebelled, a woman's voice whispered that this was a betrayal. The next second, a voice screamed to get away from Peter. In horror, Marie felt her body forcefully push Peter away. She began to apologize to the Duke that this was not what he thought. But a wild, throbbing pain appeared in my head, and again someone's whisper. Marie bent over, and Peter, confused, tried to catch her so she wouldn't fall. At that moment, a voice inside shouted through Marie not to touch him and sharply pulled her hand away. Realizing how terrible it looked through Peter's eyes, Marie began to apologize again, not understanding how to get her body back under control. And again, after a short respite, another wave of pain in my head surged with even greater force. Now these were someone's memories, images of lovers and their conversation. The lovers parted. According to the harsh fate of fate, he had to kill her. But this fact did not change their strong feelings and promises to love through time and spirit. At the very end of these uninvited outbursts, the guy, through tears, uttered his last declaration of love. It sounded in the ancient Brennian language. The pain had passed, and now Lady Torrin was completely perplexed. This was Priscilla and her lover. But what did she want from her? After all, in this body, it's not even Marie's soul, but her true soul, Dora's soul. And this phrase in the old Brennian language was known to Marie because it was also mentioned in the novel. Seeing that the agony had passed, Peter began to apologize to Marie. He thought that his kiss had caused such a violent reaction, but the girl convinced him that the kiss was not a mistake and that they would definitely try next time. Now it was urgent to make Peter's head clear, and only then talk about what was happening inside it, and who was now controlling her body. She again asked him not to move and prepared for the absorption procedure. Suddenly, a strong and daring knock on the door stopped them. It was Frank Crome, who was accompanying Peter, and he asked to open the door, since a man had come to the lady who wanted to personally apologize. Peter replied that Lady Torrin was busy and that the man would come later, but Frank said that this was impossible, since the high priest urgently needed to see the lady right now, and he was forced to open the door. The fact that the servant disobeyed the order greatly surprised Duke Levry, but was obvious to Marie. This was obvious brainwashing. The door opened. Pastor Iolaus stood calmly behind Frank. Peter repeated to the high priest that he was now an unwanted person, but he replied that this was a matter of very urgent importance, and it concerned the safety of Lady Torrin. Marie instantly understood his concern and urgency. After all, if she is the reincarnation of Priscilla, then he will never want to give her time to reveal her abilities. Peter considered the high priest's insistence to be crazy behavior, but decided to listen to him. All three sat down on the sofas by the fireplace. Before the conversation began, Duke Levry made a remark that if the information turned out to be trivial, the pastor would have to face the consequences of the Duke's wrath. Pastor Iolaus began from afar, asking whether the Duke knew about St. Priscilla Torrin. Duke Levry behaved calmly, answering that these were fables from 500 years ago. But the pastor continued, saying that all the ancient scriptures are true and, in his opinion, Marie is the reincarnation of the Holy Virgin. Since the saint is both a blessing and a disaster, she cannot become a member of the Levry family and must unconditionally belong to the Church, which is spelled out in the code of rules and laws of the empire. Peter listened to the high priest, clenching his teeth tightly, the veins showing on his courageous and handsome face. Pastor Iolaus ended his monologue by saying that, as the high priest of the empire, he is now obliged to take Lady Torrin to the temple under his care. Marie was terrified. Dumb with fear, she leaned towards the Duke and whispered his name. Her fate was now in his hands. Fortunately for her, Peter was not one of those who would so easily bend to the wishes of the Church. In a calm and iron tone, he asked the pastor for proof that his wife was a saint. Iolaus, as an equally experienced diplomat, retorted that Lady Torrin was not yet the Duke's wife, and that at the baptism all the priests felt a special connection and strength, hence his confidence. And if the Duke wants more significant evidence, then Iolaus hinted to him to try to harm Marie himself. As a saint, she has the ability to nullify any attacks, and there will be no consequences. Peter's patience came to an end. He slammed his fist on the table and called Iolaus the most cruel person. The pastor calmly replied that he proposed this method of proof, knowing in advance that the Duke would not do this, but the proposal itself already testified to his confidence that the Holy Virgin was in front of them. Then Peter said that the Church should submit a petition to the imperial family, and until then, no one from the Church would lay a finger on his wife. And he added that with any answer, let the Church not count much on his obedience. If necessary, he will speak out against the imperial family. Pastor Iolaus noted that this was essentially a conspiracy. Peter answered him that it was so, and for more compelling reasons to protect Lady Torrin, the wedding would be celebrated as soon as possible. Hearing this, the calm and confident Pastor Iolaus began to look confused. He said that he did not understand why their relationship strengthened so quickly. because he had been corresponding with Baron Eric Torin for a long time, and there was not a word about the connection between Duke Levry and his daughter. Then Peter triumphantly leaned towards Marie and asked her to enlighten the pastor about the period during which she pursued him in her unrequited love. Embarrassed, Marie replied that she was 5 years old. Now the pastor looked as if he had been struck by thunder, as if he could not believe it. Suddenly, a strong pain pierced Marie's head. It was again the whisper of lovers from other people's memories. Peter jumped to her aid, but Iolaus beat him to it and grabbed her hand. What he said at the same time shocked Marie. In her head, in the whisper that began, a declaration of love sounded in Old Brennian. And now Iolaus, word for word, sound for sound, pronounced these confessions to her. A scene from the novel appeared before my eyes. Alicia also confessed her love to Arthur and said that Pastor Iolaus taught her these words. This was the language of the times of the reign of the dragon Balbor. The next second, the fire that Peter released burned Iolaus's hand. Marie hid behind Peter. In anger, Duke Levry told Iolaus to write a will, because he would kill him now. Marie didn't believe. Was he really going to do this? A huge flame erupted from Peter's hand and consumed Iolaus. Marie looked at Iolaus and, looking into his eyes, she felt the pain of his suffering. Obeying an unknown instinct, she threw herself into the fire. Iolaus and Peter shouted in unison for her to stop. A bright flash of white light illuminated the entire room, and a huge amount of energy was released. It was as if Priscilla herself was in this light. She looked at Iolaus and said that she loved him forever. As soon as Marie touched the pastor's hands, a scream escaped from her chest and everything died down. For a few moments they both knelt, looking at each other. Marie looked at Iolaus in bewilderment, his expression and Priscilla's words. They obviously had a special relationship. The rescued Iolaus triumphantly said that let the Duke kill him again if he wants. The most important thing is that now he has seen the evidence. Saint Mary. Peter snapped angrily that he didn't want to waste his time killing the pastor. Rising from his knees, Iolaus said that since everything had become clear, the young lady urgently needed to go to church. And then he looked at Marie, so exhausted and trembling at his words. And suddenly he changed his mind. He apologized for the rudeness and said that he would even postpone the letter to the imperial family for a while because the young lady's decision should be respected. Then he added that the Duke is a strong and good man and, if she sincerely loves him, then the church will not object, and he will immediately begin to pack his things to go back soon. And if Marie has a desire to join the church, she will decide this issue on her own. When the pastor left, there was deathly silence in the room. Marie was still on the floor, breathing heavily. She closed her eyes. She did not understand what was happening, because saving Iolaus was not her intention. Priscilla did it all. It was her consciousness. The Duke broke the silence, addressing her. He came closer. He said that he could explain the pastor's salvation to himself as an unwillingness to let another person die, but he perceived hiding the power of annulment from him as a betrayal. Marie gasped for air and inarticulately tried to explain that it was not she who did it, that she was not hiding anything, because this omission occurred for the first time. Peter squatted down next to her and continued. Even if she didn't know about the power, but in front of his eyes, the pastor had just confessed his love to her, and Lady Torrin said that she didn't know anyone from the church. Marie didn't know what to say, because telling him that she didn't understand anything was a lie. She didn't know Iolaus with her own eyes, but she knew from the novel. Peter stood up and turned away. Marie slumped her shoulders helplessly. How to regain his trust? The Duke tiredly sat down in a chair. He was crushed by the overwhelming events and thoughts. Now, at this moment, he was thinking about Arthur. He said that no matter whether she betrayed him or not, he still wouldn't tell his son about it, because it would break his heart. Peter said that Arthur had become his weakness, and now he has another weakness, Marie, and he can't do anything about it. But it's not her fault, it's all his fault, his gullibility. Marie looked at Peter and thought that Duke Levry from the novel would have executed her even at the first meeting. But now there was another person in front of her. It was her Peter, kind, strong, noble, and selfless. There was no need to build a performance anymore. She would tell him everything, the whole truth, who she really was. Only in this way would she regain his trust, and in the future there would be no lies and pretense in their relationship. Suddenly, Peter jumped up and gently took her into his arms. Peter carried her to the sofa, and when he laid her down, Marie realized this was that very moment. But first it was necessary to collect all the remaining energy and neutralize the hypnosis. She wrapped her arms around his neck and touched her forehead to his. Marie summoned all the light power she could muster, wrapped her arms around Peter's neck, and touched her forehead to his. A flash of light illuminated the room. Fragments of memories flashed through Peter's head. Pastor Iolaus, Marie, himself, the people around him. Not understanding what was happening, the Duke grabbed his forehead. Marie told what happened in the temple of Prince Crumler, how he was brainwashed by a wizard with the attribute of darkness and made Peter believe that her wrist was squeezed by pure accident. And now she has freed him from the influence of this magician. The Duke could not believe that there was a dark elementalist among the priests, but he immediately guessed who it was. In order to protect the Duke in the fight against the influence of Iolaus, Marie decided to open up to him because in the entire mask universe, practically nothing is known about dark energy. The only ones who have knowledge are the owners of dark attributes, and she, as if she had read the entire book. Marie told Peter to never make eye contact with Iolaus. The pastor could brainwash one person at a time, and until the hypnosis wore off, he could not influence others. Despite the awkwardness of such knowledge, the girl spoke calmly and with restraint. And then, guiltily lowering her eyes, she waited for the Duke's verdict. Looking at her, Peter could not believe what was happening and said that now it was like a different person in front. Marie herself no longer knew who she was. The body belongs to Marie Torin, but it now contains Priscilla's consciousness, as well as her own memory of Dora. Under the weight of her own thoughts and completely confused in herself, Marie began her story. She admitted to Peter that Lady Torin died 3 years ago. She was reborn in this body on the day of her death and has no memories for all the 18 years Marie lived. She has no memories of her childhood or anything else. All her memories before her rebirth are memories from a past life. With the appearance of Priscilla inside, she began to lose confidence in anything, but she definitely doesn't want to be her. Marie lowered her head lower and lower. Tears flowed from her eyes. This confession should have cleansed her soul, but she became even more confused. Peter leaned over to Marie and said that he would kiss her now, but first he wanted to ask a question. The Duke asked if Marie from her past life remembered whether she was in love with Iolaus. Marie, sobbing, asked again that if the answer was positive, would he change his intentions. Peter replied that the answer was unimportant and nothing would change. Sobbing, she said that in her past life she was not in love with the pastor. Then Peter pulled her towards him by the waist and kissed her tenderly. The most beautiful kiss of her life was also her very first kiss. When the kiss ended, Marie understood what it meant. It was proof that he believed her, even if she was lying. Remaining on the sofa, they began to talk about energy. Peter explained to Marie that using your energy too often leads to insensitivity, and subsequently it will be difficult to detect the influence of the energies of other elementalists. Therefore, he asked Marie to save energy in order to avoid getting used to it and feel when the opponent is using his skills. The Duke knew everything about the work of energies, except for one single thing that no one could know about. He asked Marie if the pastor was now at the first stage with brainwashing, then what were his abilities at the third stage? Marie told Peter that in the final stage, Iolaus would be able to completely control other people without making eye contact, and could even order suicide. And the worst thing is that even if the caster is killed, his washing remains with the victim. Peter thought that with such an ability, under the influence of the high priest, there would have been an imperial family long ago. But if the Duke had no problems with the Empire, then it turns out that Iolaus is not brainwashing them, but is pursuing other goals. Marie thought about the pastor's possible goals. Did Iolaus need to kill her? It is possible that this plot is part of something later in the novel that she does not know about. There are 10 years left until the third stage, so there is still time. She said all this out loud, and at some point she realized that if she continued further, she might seem like a seer. Therefore, Marie decided to tell how she learned from a past life about the dark element and the high priest. But Duke Levry unexpectedly flatly refused to listen to her. He suddenly stood up and said that he needed to contact those who could help him organize a safe space in the fortress, but he asked her to be alone and not to go anywhere. Marie became worried and said that the safest place was to be with the Duke. Walking out the door, Peter paused a little and replied that not a hair would fall off her head here. But he also had something to think about alone. Stepping out the door, Duke Livry ordered that a guard be posted outside Lady Torrin's room. Also, that security should be present in the office where the priests are waiting, and immediately report all the actions of the high priest. Arthur came to Peter's office. He was very worried about Marie, but to his surprise, his father suddenly started talking about the time when he found Arthur in Magnetus. He asked if he remembered the woman who found him there and was with him until he met the Duke. Arthur replied that he did not remember her appearance, but from that moment, monsters began to appear more often on their way, and she saved him from them several times. Peter asked if he remembered her name. Was it possible that her name was Tina? Arthur replied that he didn't remember exactly, but that's how she seemed to introduce herself to him. Magnetus appeared before Peter's eyes the day when the woman handed Arthur over to the Duke. She said that someday she would appear in the boy's life again, and as soon as a person appears near Arthur who remembers his past life, he must be killed, since the fate of this person is to kill Arthur. Because everyone who remembers a past life is people cursed by the dragon Balber and possess a dark element. In the office, surrounded by guards, Iolaus recalled his past life. I remembered where it all began. When the world was created, there was no dark element at all. And the people who received the curse of the Balbor dragon and the dark element were the first children of the Father of the Lord. His 3 beloved children, and one of them was he, Iolaus. His name was then Charis. The dragon cursed hares for killing his beloved. And now his burden was to live different lives, remembering his sins and suffering, each time experiencing circumstances in which he had to unwittingly kill his beloved. Iolaus remembered the deaths of his loved ones. They all asked him to end their lives. Killing with his own hands over and over again, he experienced wild mental pain. Over and over again, he asked the Father to stop this curse. Priscilla was one of them. He knew about her rebirth, knew that if they met, he would have to kill her. To avoid torment and another tragedy, Iolaus gave the pills to Baron Torrin. By taking the pills, they will not meet, she will not love him, and will not suffer. To prevent history from repeating itself, Iolaus should have killed Marie today. Kill before he looks into her eyes. But he couldn't, and now he was only thinking about the next meeting. In the office, Peter thought about Marie. His thoughts were confused. There was no doubt that she was the owner of the light attribute. But because of the memories of her past life, she also knew about the dark element. He remembered their conversation when he asked about how long she liked him. Then Marie answered that she was 5 years old, but now she said that she did not remember anything about life in this world before her rebirth 3 years ago, and according to simple calculations, it turns out that she knew him in a previous life, which she remembered in some then another world and time. All this could have been explained if he had let her finish, but Peter understood that he simply did not want to hear the truth, which would lead to doubts about her. He remembered her lips and their kiss. Peter's cheeks turned red at the memory. And yet, returning to the owners of the dark element, Peter restored in his memory the generally known information that he knew. Tina and the other 2 committed sins, killing a child, a lover, a parent. They were punished with a dark attribute and a curse, forcing them to repeat these horrifying things and suffer in agony. Undoubtedly, Iolaus was the one who killed his beloved. He looked at Marie the way one only looks at a loved one. However, Marie says that she has not met Iolaus before, and there is no lie in her words. Tormented by this question, the Duke grabbed his head, forgetting that Arthur was still in the room. Fearing for his father, he called out to him. Looking at his son, the Duke again remembered their meeting. Was it fate when he met Thena with Arthur in Magnetus? In those days, due to the constant unrest of demons, Magnetus was a terrifying place. Even he, Duke Livry, who possessed the highest level of fire, found it difficult to fight. That day, the last demon remained, and Peter's magical powers were running out. She appeared in front of him, extending a helping hand. She brought him to her dilapidated home and took care of him until his strength was completely restored. Then the Duke offered her a reward for her work, ready to fulfill her every desire. To his surprise, the woman asked to take a little 5-year-old boy and take care of him until he grows up and magical powers awaken in him. At that moment, Peter still did not understand whether the woman was the mother of the child. She assured that the child would not cause him difficulties, and would not tarnish his honor. And the Duke agreed to take him under his guardianship. Over time, Peter fell in love with the sincere and charming Arthur and began to cherish him more than anyone in this world. And if someone appeared from whom his son would be in danger, Peter would not be able to simply stand by. In the prophecy of that woman, the one who remembers his past life should be killed. But could it be Marie? How could danger come from this pure being who sincerely believed him? Peter clenched his teeth. No, he couldn't kill her. Marie and Arthur are both precious to him, and he will protect them at all costs. To do this, you first need to find out everything about the dark element. And for this, you need to talk to a valuable informant. Heading to the library, Peter asked Arthur not to leave the room, and if it suddenly happened that he would cross paths with the high priest, then the most important thing was not to look him in the eye under any circumstances. Arthur asked if he could at least see Marie, but to the boy's surprise, his father forbade this too. The Duke affectionately patted his son on the head and left. In her room, exhausted Marie, leaning on the armrest of the sofa, fell asleep. Plunging into slumber, she had a dream, and it was so real, like a lucid dream. In the dream, she was someone else. A man approached her. He called her Tina and was worried about her sadness and tears. By his appearance, Marie immediately realized that this was the first son of the godfather dragon Balbor, the performator, the most beloved child, most like him, and who had not received a curse. He sat down next to her and hugged her. Then the girl burst into tears even more. She said that she had just killed her beloved son in her sleep for the 190th time. She tried her best not to meet him, but it all happened again. The brother consoled her and gently stroked her head. He said that the child would not hate her. At these words, tears flowed even more from Tina's eyes. She replied that it would be better if he hated her and cursed her. The performator said that he met Hares a couple of days ago, but he no longer remembers the first murder of his beloved because so much time has passed since then. Then Tina asked why Hares killed his beloved, and he said that Hares could not withstand the changed soul of his beloved, who stopped loving him, and until the father forgives Hares, no one can help him. In response, the performator asked if she remembered the first murder of her son, and Tina replied that as she now remembers this terrible day, her son was sick with an unknown incurable fever. She had the choice to leave him to die from suffering or end his suffering with her own hands. And then, out of guilt, she killed herself. Then the performator replied that he could not understand the father when he punished her. And although both of them, Tina and Hares, committed a sin out of love, he can understand her, because he would have acted exactly the same. The performator was very sorry that they were born again and again, experiencing the same torments. He confessed to Tina that he had decided to end it and kill father. Frightened, Tina recoiled from her brother and said that the performer should not even think about it, because the father is omnipotent, he is both good and law. Then the performer opened up to Tina. He thought a lot, and he realized the true essence of the father. The all-seeing father. He knew that his children Tina and Hares would commit their sins. The father is almighty. He could stop Hares. He could cure Tina's child. But the father did not do all this because the father is not good. Good excludes either omniscience or omnipotence. Good cannot exist next to these qualities. Leaving Tenu, the performator said that he would find a way to save her and Hares from suffering. Tina tried to stop her brother, but he said that everything was much more complicated, and there was a flaw in the father's punishment, with the help of which he would free them, and the father had already foreseen his death at the hands of his beloved eldest son. Sometime later, the dragon Balbor was killed. But this death is only the death of a person's physical shell, but his essence continues to live. Proof of this is the world around him. The performator disappeared. He became the third to receive a curse for killing his parent. Marie woke up with a start. Sweat was dripping from her face. What a strange dream it was. It turns out that the performer killed the father and, with the dark element, acquired the skill of omniscience, which allows one to look into the future but does not give the opportunity to change it. This is the essence of the curse. Suddenly, Marie was seized with hysterical laughter. Really? What kind of story is this? This is not discussed in the book, as if the author in that world wrote a spin-off, and now she had the opportunity to find out about it. But the laughter quickly gave way to stupor, because it turns out that in this world, None of the people remember their past life. Only Hares, who killed his beloved, killed his child 10, and Performator, who killed his parent, remembered their past lives. Marie drooped now, knowing these circumstances. She was tormented by the question of who she really was. The confidence that she was just a reader caught in a book was fading. Because there are no accidents in the flow of time. What if she really is not an exception to the rules of this world? And the one who remembers his past life is a carrier of the dark element. Suddenly, Marie felt someone's presence and a voice whispering in her ear. The girl said that Marie exists in the past, in the future, and in the present, and in order to see all her lives full of sin, she needs to sin again, and the moment she realizes her curse, the power of the dark element will increase. Marie turned towards the voice, but saw no one. Tears rolled from her eyes. She refused to believe that this was about her. This was a mistake. This was about another person. A sharp knock on the door distracted Marie. It was Arthur. He missed her and came to see her. Marie fell to her knees and hugged Arthur tightly. Now she understood everything. Her heart was calling to meet him, and it would be good if there was no reason for this. After the dream, Marie realized that this is not the world of some book, and all the people are not just characters. This is all for real. The performer possessed the power of the earth, the ability to create. And after the death of the father, he received limitless opportunities to create his own world. He could create a world from a past life, because this is exactly the nickname that the author of the novel Musk had. Peter walked up the steps to the library. Along the way, he constantly thought about how likely it was that Marie possessed both the dark and light elements at the same time. Such people may well exist, and Arthur is proof of this. She remembers her past life, knows about the dark element, and the way Iolaus reacted to her. All this leads to mixed thoughts. Marie's face appeared before his eyes, and Peter cast aside all doubts. No, all this could not concern her. Peter entered the spacious library. He walked up to the crystal ball and touched it. The ball glowed red, and a voice from it asked why it was disturbed. The Duke, in a tone that did not require any objection, demanded to open the portal and come to him. The entity inside reluctantly opened the portal, and a moment later, Gray Fox appeared in front of the Duke, one of the two owners of the earth element, the last one with the creative ability he can bring into reality anything he thinks about. To conserve his energy while traveling through portals, he shrinks himself in size. Having drunk the necessary elixir, he appeared before Peter in his true face. Bowing on the table in his favorite clownish style, he asked the Duke on what business he had called him. Gray has such manners since he worked as a magician in a tower at the imperial court. In the tower, he achieved great success, surpassing all magicians in his talent, and was even appointed successor to Plus Breckham, the master of the tower. Plus, along with Gray, was also the owner of the earth element. But Gray was kicked out of the tower, and the reason for this was the creation of his own elixirs with magical powers. Elixirs influenced human energy and gave magical abilities even to those who did not have them. The imperial family reacted negatively to this idea, since being descendants of the dragon Balbor, they felt that it violated their foundations. In other words, the monopoly on magic, in their opinion, belonged entirely to them. Fearing that after his expulsion, Gray Fox would still make elixirs, he was sentenced to death. So in a prison cell, awaiting the execution of his sentence, Gray Fox met Duke Peter Levry, who offered him a lucrative deal. Not surprisingly, the deal concerned Fox's activities, and now, as soon as Gray arrived, he instantly took out a bottle of elixir that the Duke had previously ordered. Fox, with a charming smile, shamelessly announced that the price of the miraculous elixir of vitality for Lady Torrin would be 10 million Brontes. The Duke, angry, tried to snatch the bottle, but Fox noted with an important look that, as always, the money was in advance. Noticing that Peter was very gloomy, Fox, constantly grimacing in his favorite form, asked why he called him. It didn't seem like just for the sake of the elixir. Then Peter asked if Fox knew something about the dark element, because before he was kicked out of the tower, Gray participated in the history of writing magic. The magician was taken aback by such questions. Firstly, he had never seen such information in the manuscripts, with the exception of one mention. Secondly, he was kicked out when the book was not even half rewritten. And thirdly, why did the Duke need this information? Then Peter told about the story with the high priest Iolaus. Gray was horrified by what he heard. Carriers of the dark element are in themselves an incredible danger, but the fact that the highest spiritual person is such was simply the limit of disaster. Now, the magician's head was torn. He was trying to understand why the high priest was giving a drug that suppressed Milady's power. And her reserve of strength is so great that it is about to break through. Peter said that Iolaus most likely brainwashed Marie and was planning something, because her power would nullify his abilities. Now it was necessary to find out the high priest's plan while he was in the fortress. As soon as Fox heard that the high priest was within the castle walls, he immediately started to run away, but Peter stopped him. The Duke tried to reassure the magician that the dark elementalist was only at the first stage, but he struggled with all his might, screaming at the top of his lungs that there could be no certainty here. Peter asked Fox again about the book on the history of magic, and asked him to tell him about the small reference that Gray recognized. This mention was told to Gray by the master of the tower himself, the great magician Pluis Brahem. Pluis said that there is a secret book that contains information about the owners of the dark element, and that someday the time will come and the contents of this book will be revealed. Then the Duke decided that it was necessary to meet with Pluis in person. Fox supported his idea, and, not wanting to linger another minute in the fortress where the dark elementalist was located, he gave Peter the elixir, even without the previously mentioned price or advance. And in an instant he disappeared into the portal. Exhausted, Fox fell onto a chair at his desk, as was his habit when he finished with some important task, throwing his feet up on it. Looking around, Fox saw a bottle. It was the elixir that Duke Levry ordered. But what then did he give to Peter? Arthur was very worried about Marie and, disobeying his father, still came to visit her. Marie said that not listening to her father was bad because something bad could happen on the way to her. But Arthur said that the ban on not seeing her was beyond his strength. The girl remained silent, but inside herself she completely agreed. She herself could not help but see Arthur, and this prohibition seemed strange to her. Then Arthur asked what happened in Prince Crumler's castle, and why father and Milady were so afraid of the high priest. The answer that the high priest ordered Lady Torn to go with him to the temple plunged Arthur into shock. He said that under no circumstances should she leave, and whoever the high priest was, he would talk to him and explain that it is impossible to take a person to the temple against his will. Marie looked at Arthur in amazement. In this ardor and courage, he was so much like Peter that it was impossible to say that he did not have a drop of the Duke's blood. Looking at him now, the adult Arthur stood before his eyes. Then, for the sake of his beloved Alicia, he went to mortal combat. Marie's heart melted. Seeing her tender gaze, Arthur leaned towards her and said that she should always be there. Marie gently hugged Arthur and sighed bitterly. She was tormented by a question from a dream. What if the nickname Proformator for the author of the mask is not just a coincidence, and she is not just a random reader? What if she is Tina? Tears flowed from Marie's eyes, because if this is so, then Arthur will die by her hand. The boy heard her sobs and touched her cheek. Wiping her tears, he asked her not to cry, and even if he is not as strong as his father, he will definitely become stronger. A light breeze opened the window. It swept across Marie's face, drying the trails of tears. Marie immediately understood what had happened. It was one of Arthur's powers, the element of wind. But in order not to give away her guesses, she jumped up as if she did not understand what had happened, and headed to the window, saying that the north wind was playing tricks. Arthur laughed and admitted that he did it. Marie feigned surprise. Arthur confessed to her that his crystal was special, and it could control the 4 elements, with the exception of the elements of light and darkness. With these words, he filled the room with water flowers. Handing her a flower, Arthur promised that no matter what happens, he will become strong and protect her. Arthur took Marie's hand and, apologizing for his greed, asked her to hug him. The girl knelt down and hugged the boy tightly. Only she could be his mother. Touched, Arthur told Marie the secret of his origin, that he and his father were not related by blood. The obvious similarity between Arthur and Peter, like 2 drops of water, allowed Marie to notice that it was possible that Arthur was separated from Peter when he was very young. But Arthur cut off this assumption, telling the full story of his stay in Magnetus. Most of all, he did not want to pretend to Marie who he was not. Marie put her hand on his and convinced him that she loved him for who he was, just that he was him. Happy Arthur hugged Marie. Marie asked him never to tell anyone about this again, although she perfectly understood his desire to open his soul to her. After all, now she also has a terrible secret, a terrible suggestion that their destinies are connected, and in this intertwining, Arthur may turn out to be an accidental victim. Holding Arthur tightly, Marie decided not to share her thoughts with anyone, because this could make the situation even more dangerous. Their peaceful peace was disturbed by Peter bursting in. When the Duke came to his son's room, he did not find him there. The words of that woman from Magnetus flashed through Peter's head again, saying that if he meets a person who remembers his past, he must be killed. Mad with fear, he rushed to Lady Torrhen's chambers. Seeing that Arthur was all right, but completely exhausted, the Duke sat down on his knee. Breathing heavily and barely able to formulate his words, he told Arthur that he had made him very worried. But he immediately looked at his son with a sad look full of love. And holding out his hands, he called to him. Repenting that he had made his father worry, Arthur ran up to his father and hugged him tightly. Marie looked sadly at the feelings of father and son. They value each other so much. How she wanted to be a part of this, and for a moment it seemed possible. Only now, knowing that there is a possibility of harming them, does she have such a right to be with them? That evening, the high priest and his retinue left the palace. This did not make Marie any easier, but Peter assured her that everything was under his control. Now Lady Torrhen's thoughts were occupied with something completely different. She thought about her father. Marie assumed that before leaving the palace, his memories were erased, but Peter denied this version, since the washing could only affect one person. And although Marie had to agree with the Duke, she was nevertheless tormented by the question of how they would get consent to the wedding from their father. She asked this question at dinner that day. Peter said with a happy face that there was no need to worry about it, and he handed Lady Torrhen a letter with the imperial seal of Bren. Emperor Tyrogue Amadeus Bren himself answered him in a letter. He expressed regret about the imperfection of wedding laws in the empire and reported that he would make amendments to the legislation as soon as possible to resolve such issues. Marie was shocked by the influence of the Levry family on the empire, one desire of Peter, and for his sake the emperor is ready to change the law. Peter smiled at Marie's amazement and said that it would take a little time for the laws to take effect, and then they would get married, which immediately made her blush, because this was both her greatest desire and her greatest fear. Several days passed. Lady Torrhen was in her chambers. She couldn't stop thinking about the Duke, how smart and enterprising he was, how influential, handsome, charming he is, and even if his proposal to get married was not at all romantic. Marie finally discovered one simple truth for herself. She loves him. Peter caught her with these thoughts. He chuckled, looking at the frightened Marie, and then he smugly sat down opposite, crossing his legs. Peter smiled, judging by Marie's confused look and her incomprehensible babble. Of course, he understood that she was thinking about him and was apparently caught at the most piquant moment. And, of course, in his usual manner, he immediately told her about it, which made her blush even more. Without further mocking the young lady, Peter said that he had come on business. Namely, he decided to visit the warrior monsters who had returned from the mountain. And he came to Marie to invite her to join him. Having conceived this venture, Peter did not expect Marie to agree, but Marie was simply delighted with the idea, which really surprised the Duke. Of course, Marie was happy because she could finally see one of the minor characters, but no less significant for Arthur in the future, Thomas Spark. The best archer, an imperial warrior with the element of wind. Peter didn't quite like Marie's strange joy, but he didn't go back on his words. She would get to know the warriors. As Lady Torrhen's emotions subsided, she asked a question regarding the medicine that was suppressing her power. She recalled the Duke's promise, after analyzing the medicine, to bring her a list of all the ingredients included in its composition. Peter was quite surprised and asked why the magic suppressor was needed. Marie did not say that she needed the medicine for an experiment in which she could discover her true essence. In order to be peacefully next to Arthur and Peter, she needed to find out if there was a dark element in her. So that Peter would not suspect anything, she had to come up with something plausible, and she succeeded. Making an innocent expression on her face, Marie said that the uncontrollable surges of energy were very draining on her because that time with Iolaus, her body was controlled by a saint, so she should drink a little medicine to regain control. At first, Peter took this as stupidity, because essentially this is her power and it will not harm anyone. But then he thought that, as an option, this maneuver could create a shield that would leave her sensitive to the magical flow. Marie took advantage of his hesitation and began to pretend that she was possessed by the instincts of a saint, and that despite the fatigue, she urgently needs to restore his energy because she feels how much has fallen on him. The Duke asked her not to do this. Seeing that the plan was working, she continued to press further and ask for medicine so that these surges could be regulated. And in the end, Peter gave up. The only thing he asked was to just carry the medicine just in case, and use it only when she could not resist her instinct at all. That afternoon, Marie was walking in the garden with Arthur. Arthur willingly shared with her his achievements in learning to master his elements. The little sandmen he created were so cute they danced and sang. But there was something that really worried the boy. Arthur could not master the fourth element, namely the element of fire, very important in the ceremony of proclamation of the heir, which will take place in a year. As you know, it was necessary to have the second level of fire energy ability and why a torch, but Arthur hasn't even reached the first level yet, and only has a year of training left with Count Louis Mortec. At the mention of the Count's name, Marie froze. Now a clear picture of the cause of the tragedy on Arthur's birthday appeared before her eyes. Louis Mortec, constantly humiliating and mocking the child, of course, in this way could not reveal the power of fire in him. Even on the contrary, he created such an intensity that on this fateful day, Arthur's forces came into resonance. After all, it is the spiritual state that influences energy management. And the Mortec couple did nothing but develop Arthur's insecurity and break him. Then Marie realized that she needed to do her best to find the key to Arthur's heart, to his confidence, because perhaps in this way she could change the course of events. Marie sat down next to Arthur, and putting all her kindness into it, she tried to explain to him that great power was sleeping inside him, and he would definitely comprehend it. He will be able to reach the second level of fire energy before the ceremony of proclamation of the heir, and even more. The main thing is not to stop believing in it and not to despair. Seeing how the boy blossomed at these words, the girl was very pleased. She would do everything to destroy the Mortec destruction system. Suddenly, the positive attitudes were distracted by a man who suddenly appeared in the alley. It was Thomas Spark. Delighted, Arthur rushed to meet him. The friendship that reigned between these two was immediately visible. Without wasting any time, happy Arthur told Thomas that his father was going to get married and immediately introduced Lady Torrin. Marie bowed shyly. She was very curious to meet this brave man, who in the novel, although he was impudent and talkative, but judging by the relationship with the Duke of Levry and his son, this was their man. But Thomas just looked at her with a cold, appraising gaze, without saying a word. This look, like a dagger, threw Marie, who was not expecting such a meeting, into the heat. Arthur tried to rectify the situation and told Thomas that she was not just the future mistress of the Duchy of Levry, she was also his mother. But this argument made the tough warrior clench his cheekbones even more. Arthur was very upset by this cold reception and, beating his fists, demanded that Thomas apologize for his rudeness to Milady. Spark feigned an apology, making a slight bow, and then he turned sharply, and despite Arthur's resistance, carried the boy into the palace, leaving the dumbfounded Lady Torrin to look behind her. In the castle, the young master could not restrain his emotions and demanded an explanation for his hostility regarding Milady, because he does not know her at all, and she is the sweetest and kindest lady. Then Thomas replied that Arthur was mistaken and Lady Torrin was a very suspicious person, and while the conversation was on, Thomas related an incident that happened along the way of their mission. While hunting, Thomas caught a messenger demonic raven bird. There was a letter tied to the bird's paw. Ordinary people do not use demonic creatures to help themselves. Only dark magicians can do this. And the person who sent this bird for the dark magician was Lady Torrin's father. The text of a letter flashed before Thomas's eyes, in which Baron Torrin informed the magician that Lord Levry most likely saw his daughter's core, and it was necessary for the magician to urgently come to the palace and assess the situation. But Thomas did not tell Arthur about the contents of the letter. He only said that since her family communicates with dark magicians, This is very bad. Seeing how reluctantly Arthur accepted this information, Thomas immediately thought that the villainess had already touched the boy's tender heart. Therefore, he decided not to put pressure on him, but, patting Arthur on the head, simply asked him not to be alone with Marie Torin. Such affectionate treatment was not typical for an avid warrior, so Spark was a little embarrassed, and taking advantage of this, Arthur immediately asked what was in that letter. Thomas, not expecting anything, took out the letter when suddenly the paper caught fire in his hands. The shocked Spark fell to his knees, clutching the ashes while Arthur was having fun, because he had just achieved something he had practically never hoped for. Almost crying, Thomas said that it was wonderful that he had finally advanced in his ability, but he had no idea what he had just burned. But Arthur stepped on the ashes with his foot and, bending down, quietly said that Spark should not tell the Duke anything about what had happened. And he did not bother the Duke about dubious suspicions regarding Lady Torin. Thomas Spark, such a strong and brave warrior, simply froze from the changes in this little sweet boy that had occurred in his absence. A moment later, he was already walking into the office of Duke Levry. It was necessary to urgently warn him about the danger of communication with this Lady Torin. When the Duke finds out the truth, he will definitely take action. Throwing open the door with force, Thomas announced from the very threshold that Lady Torin needed to be driven away. Peter calmly noted that Spark should be careful with his judgments, because Lady Torin is his future wife, and asked why he had such an attitude towards a person he did not know. Then Thomas said that he knew that the lady could not even hide the core, because he read this in a letter that he intercepted from a demonic bird sent by her father to an unknown dark magician. Peter was at first surprised that the secret went beyond their close circle, but still calmly asked Spark where the letter was now. Thomas did not hand over Arthur and said that he burned him to avoid interception of this information. Then Peter put aside his business and came closer to the warrior. Looking into the face of Thomas, who did not expect such a turn of events, Peter, with a grin, told him to be as dumb as a fish, and if this information comes out and there is at least some problem with their marriage, then he will personally deal with him. In the evening, at dinner, an acquaintance took place with the soldiers of the Duchy of Levry. Amid Lady Torin's encouraging reactions, the soldiers recounted their adventures. Only Thomas Spark chewed silently and glared at her. Arthur really wanted to share the amazing news about the discovery of his ability and, intriguing his parents, he said that after dinner he would tell something interesting first to Marie and only then to Peter, which caused laughter from the guests, who correctly but good-naturedly noticed that no matter how much he raised the child, he was still not on his side. Marie and Arthur laughed too. The only one this sweet woman could not deceive was Thomas Spark, who was constantly trying to figure out versions of what exactly Lady Torin had bewitched them all with. One of the versions was that they belonged to drones living on the edge of the mainland. According to rumors, these creatures use mystical charms to lure men. And then it dawned on Spark. It's strange that he didn't immediately think of using his unique ability. He inherited this ability from his parents, or rather from the fusion of their two abilities. This is eternal strength from his father and vision from afar, and the ability to see the truth from his mother. Thanks to this merger, Thomas has a special gift. He can see the aura of the human element of the Bren Empire. Concentrating on his ability, the first thing Spark saw was the unbearably bright red aura of Duke Levry, which clearly said that his mind was not bewitched or besotted. When he turned his gaze to Marie's aura, there was an even more dazzling white aura, much stronger than that of the Duke. Based on the amount of this energy, he thought it was very strange that this woman could not hide the core. But suddenly Lady Torin's aura began to darken, and gray and black colors began to interfere with it. Without a doubt, it was the aura of the black element. Spark swallowed convulsively. He had never heard of someone owning more than one element. But not only Marie alerted him, it's strange that he didn't see Arthur's red aura. But today, he showed him his fiery abilities. Thomas wondered if everything was okay with his abilities, or for some reason he simply couldn't see his aura. His thoughts were interrupted by Peter, who noticed how Thomas was constantly looking at Marie all evening. He told him that he would stop staring at his bride. Thomas only answered coldly, glaring at Marie, saying that his mind was clouded by the lady's unprecedented beauty. In the evening in the gazebo, Marie recalled this gaze piercing into her like a dagger. A copper-skinned knight known for his unwavering loyalty and free spirit. And unfortunately, for some reason, he did not love her. My thoughts were interrupted by a light touch of a hand. It was Arthur, as promised. He came to share with Marie his today's achievement in mastering the second degree of the ability of fire. But before he began, Marie firmly stated that Arthur no longer needed the help of Count Mortek, and as soon as he arrived, he needed to refuse his useless services. Now she will personally take on his preparation and will help him in his training every day. After her fiery speech, Marie apologized for interrupting Arthur because he was the first to say something important. But delighted that he would now spend even more time with my lady, the boy decided to hide his progress so as not to cancel these lessons. Smiling, he said that he didn't want to say anything special, and in order to distract Marie from asking about it, he quickly took her for an evening walk. During which he kept saying how good it is that now my lady will be present at his training. The next day, they had dinner in a small dining room, since all the large halls were occupied by soldiers. Marie was very happy about this cozy family dinner. At dinner, they served beef liver, a healthy but not particularly tasty dish from Levry's long-standing family recipe. Knowing the taste of the dish, Peter decided to play a trick on Marie by recommending that she start the meal with it. Emotions about the special taste of the dish were not long in coming. Marie simply could not believe that this disgusting dish was the signature recipe of the Levry family. She told Arthur not to eat this liver, and she urgently needed to inform the cook so that he could make changes. But the embarrassed Arthur told Marie how this dish appeared in the family. It turns out that Peter's mother came up with it because he was very sick as a child. She herself personally went down to the kitchen and helped in preparing the dishes, compiling the most useful recipes. Marie apologized and began to forcefully absorb the contents of the plate. But Peter assured her that everything was fine. His mother died when he was only 6 years old. She was very caring. But still he soberly assessed the taste of the dish. After words of care, he handed Marie the elixir, saying that he also took care of her health. And I ordered this magical elixir from a trusted person. The elixir will give her strength. Peter and Arthur wanted to see the elixir in action because it would give her strength. And Marie drank the bottle. The next moment, her vision grew dim and she began to fall. Suddenly, the noise made by Arthur and Peter became so loud that Marie's ears could barely stand the screams. Opening her eyes, she felt some strange lightness in her body. There was a cup the size of Marie nearby, and she herself was on the table. It turned out that Grey Fox mixed up the elixirs. Instead of the elixir of vitality, he gave Peter a vial of his elixir of reduction for traveling through portals. Peter told Marie about this embarrassment, and she demanded that the man return her size. But her request was not so easy to satisfy, because traveling through portals requires a lot of energy, and Fox would need at least a week before the next recharge. And on top of everything else, Fox is a criminal. Therefore, Marie will have to wait in any case. But in the meantime, Peter kindly offered her his pocket as a location. Standing on Peter's palms, Marie asked what to say to Count Mortek, who was about to arrive. Peter said that they would tell him that my lady was ill. Peter was about to put Marie in his pocket when Arthur loudly asked his father to give him the honor of carrying Marie with him. In fact, Marie looked so sweet that it was rare for anyone to resist asking for this opportunity to take care of her. Father and son began to argue about who would cope better with their responsibilities. It is unknown how this argument would have ended if Marie's thin voice from Peter's palms had not squeaked for everyone to shut up. Marie reminded Peter that vassals would arrive soon, and it would not be entirely convenient if the fact of her amazing decrease was revealed. Also, she didn't say this, but she couldn't allow Count Mortek to be left alone with the young master, so Arthur gained the right to carry little Marie with him. Marie and Arthur were having a nice conversation in the garden, where, as if out of nowhere, Thomas appeared. And although Arthur managed to hide Marie behind his back, Thomas, using his second level of wind ability, teleportation, immediately discovered its secret. Seeing Milady's small stature, Spark immediately began calling Marie a witch. But Arthur explained how this decrease occurred, and that it was not associated with any demonic abilities, but only with the mistake of the Duke's confidant. Thomas immediately understood who the boy was talking about, and noticed that, Despite the great abilities of this person, he did not like him. While Thomas reluctantly apologized to Marie, Count Mortek appeared in the garden. Thomas at one point took Marie to his place, saying that it would be better this way. Seeing Thomas and Arthur together, the Count immediately did not miss the opportunity to mock both of them. He reminded Thomas of his origins, of the low position of his mother, whom the aristocrat loved. And Arthur noticed that friendly communication with such ragamuffins lowers his own status. Despite his tough temper, Thomas, accustomed to such insults, ignored them and even told the Count that everything was so. But Arthur did not tolerate such arrogance and insults addressed to his friend, and firmly told the Count that, as an aristocrat, he should choose his words more carefully and treat people friendly. This is exactly what the Countess herself taught him, and if Count Mortek does not do this, then that means he is not an aristocrat. These correct and confident words spoken by Arthur simply shocked the Count. Where was that insecure boy whom he could constantly humiliate? Enraged, he immediately said that this impudent behavior was clearly due to the blasphemous influence of Lady Torrin. But even here he failed to offend the boy. He only heard from Arthur that the Count did not have the right to insult Milady. Realizing that no one here would be afraid of him or listen to him anymore, Count Mortek hurried to leave, saying that he would report to the Duke that his son could not behave properly with his elders. When the Count left, Thomas took out a squeaking Marie from under his shirt. She waved her arms and said that she was proud of Arthur, and for his words in defense of Thomas, the Duke would also praise him. Then Thomas said that it seems that Arthur really is influenced by Marie because he heard her scolding Count Mortek all this time, and I must admit he approves of this influence. Marie smiled sweetly and replied that she was cursing because neither Thomas nor Arthur deserved such an arrogant attitude towards them. This remark confused Spark, and Marie felt how their relationship, which had not worked out at the beginning, was finally getting better. Marie heard the Count puffing as he climbed the steps, having experienced another attack of anger towards him, and in annoyance that he'd just left without a final word. Marie sincerely wished that this old brat would fall and his nose would bleed. And who would have thought her wish instantly came true? Arthur and Thomas ran up to help the Count, but the arrogant old man only snapped, spitting out blood. Marie was left completely bewildered whether this fall was an accident. In the evening, Marie sat on the table in the office next to Peter. They had a pleasant conversation, Marie telling how she had a good day with Arthur and Thomas. Their conversation was interrupted by Count Mortek, who came to discuss with the Duke Lady Torrin's meeting with the vassals, whom she needed to meet before the wedding. Having hidden Marie with lightning speed, Peter answered Count Mortek that this was impossible now since Milady was ill. The Count was very unhappy, but Peter responded coldly to all these attempts at dissatisfaction, until in the end he warned him that he would not want to be known as a crazy person cutting off the heads of his loyal subjects. But the Count's behavior might make him so. Listening to the Duke talk, Marie truly felt like his wife. Having swallowed the direct threat from the Duke, the Earl said that he had other issues to resolve, namely preparations for Arthur's coming-of-age ceremony. He said that it was necessary to install a statue of the dragon Balbara in the hall, and at the ceremony itself to deliver a speech he had prepared for the gods, because the ceremony and the future heir would be watched by the imperial family. And the number of times Peter Levry neglected imperial traditions at all kinds of family events is simply the height of disgrace. And the fact that the head of the most powerful family in the empire is an atheist is better not to be disseminated among the public. With these words, he threw a book with the title Outstanding Geniuses on the table and left. Marie walked up to the book and carefully looked into it. It was not very convenient to turn the pages because of such a small height, but Peter helped her. The book told about some geniuses who have long since passed away. Struck by the dialogue that had just occurred between the Duke and the Count, Marie asked Peter if he really was an atheist. Duke Levry replied that faith in God is an instinct inherent in every inhabitant of the empire, but for some reason he lacks it, which is quite strange for him to feel. Marie thought that this was really strange, because in this world the words about God and the divine are not just words, as in her world. There was a lot of evidence of this around: magic, divine blessings, or curses. And the most gifted man in the empire, Duke Peter Levry, did not believe in it. Then Marie asked the question differently. She asked if he denied the existence of God. Peter lit a fire in his hand and, looking at it carefully, said that he was sure that God exists. And then, clenching his fist, he extinguished the flame and added that he did not believe that some force could control him, because he was God. Marie, in turn, asked if so, then his lack of faith could greatly worsen relations with the imperial family. Peter replied that their attitude towards him did not matter at all, because they were always in fear that Peter, having such enormous power, could lay claim to the throne. But now everything has changed, because he has a weakness in the people dear to him, 5 years ago, Arthur, and now Marie. Suddenly, their intimate conversation was interrupted by the voice of Gray Fox. She said that he had discovered a misunderstanding in the elixir, and in a few minutes he would arrive through the portal to the Duke. The voice was without Fox himself, only because he used the ability of the wind, amplified sound. The novel says that this was also one of Arthur's favorite abilities. And while Gray arrived through the teleporter, Peter explained the principle of Fox's medicinal business. Such elixirs can only be made by 2 people in the Empire, 2 with the creating ability of the earth element, Fox and the Tower Master. The principle of their creation is such that someone with his energy is shared with Fox, and he already creates an elixir with the ability of a given element. As for example, it just happened taking the element of wind. Fox created an elixir, thanks to which he used the ability of amplified sound. Marie really liked this innovation and was upset that the imperial family did not allow this idea to be legalized. A moment later, Fox was already in the office and handed Marie a small bottle of elixir. Marie found her height and finally met this brilliant magician. Gray was delighted with Milady's beauty and presented her with a flower as a gift. Dissatisfied not only with Fox's mistake, but also with his compliments to Marie, Peter began to drive the magician away. But Marie stopped him, saying that she had one more thing to do with this talented man. Marie asked if Fox had ever made elixirs from the light element because she wanted to order him a restoration elixir.